The Rebel Capitalist Show. All right, guys, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome someone to the Rebel Capitalist Show that I'm really looking forward to introducing you to. He has an awesome documentary out called The End Game. His name is Patrick Gentempo. Did I get that right, Patrick?
You've got it right. Yeah, very good.
All right. Welcome to the Rebel Capitalist Show, my friend.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I just love the name of your show. Inspires me in and of itself.
Yeah, it's kind of what the documentary is all about.
Really
to
is.
a certain degree.
Yeah, so, it really is. You know, it's funny because I'm looking at the hashtag on your hat. It says "End the Fed," and kind of symmetrically, this idea of end game is born out of that kind of a theme, in the sense that you speak very eloquently about what's going on, kind of on a macro scale, and it paints a picture of things that are kind of disturbing at best and threatening, in many respects. So we have made a series of documentaries on so many subjects, but we did one recently on COVID and the implications of COVID, the COVID vaccine, the COVID shutdowns, everything that was going on. And it brought to light the real threats that are on the horizon. And our audience, which we have a very large audience, basically was writing in saying, "Hey, what do we do?" You've done a great job of laying out, all of the challenges, the threats, et cetera. What do we do now? What do we do with our finances? Where can our money be safe? How do we protect our families? And there's certainly call it the man-made disasters with what's going on, just with the policy decisions and so on. But there are also things that are happening, like our grid is really not in the best of shape, and we just saw that in Texas not long ago. They lost it for a while, and they were minutes away. We actually, in Endgame, we interviewed a PhD from the University of Texas in Austin who is involved in the Texas grid, and he basically said we were minutes away from losing it for 3 months. And I don't have to start to paint the picture of the mayhem that would have occurred if it went down for 3 months, especially because people are unprepared. So how do you prepare? What kind of food stores, what kind of water stores, home protection? I mean, there's so many considerations. And I, had some familiarity around these areas, but I had no idea how deep that rabbit hole goes. So in essence, we decided to put together, we have over 30 experts that we put together, we interviewed them, we created this docuseries.
And the docuseries is End Game, and it's not just economic end game. No. It's kind of how to prepare for a potential collapse in the system itself. So do you want to go into kind of the subcategories?
Sure.
We'll say economics. So you interview people like me, like Schiff. I think you interviewed Tom Woods on more of the money side of the equation.
Yeah, Robert Kiyosaki is in there also.
And Hartman, I believe, as well.
Jason Hartman.
But then you go into other things too, like how to, food storage and homeschooling and whatnot. Can you expand on those?
Sure. As you said, the economics is covered very in a lot of depth because it's important. How do you prepare? And there's the investment side of economics. As far as where do you put your money? Should it go here? Should it go there? Crypto good? Crypto bad? Do you believe in this market? And certainly we covered those background. But there's also an aspect of that that's a preparation aspect, saying what resources should you have at home in the way of finances? Should you have precious metals? Should you have some dollars? So there's conversation around that aspect of it too, which I think is kind of important. But as we get into other categories outside of the finance side, there is preparation as far as supplies, and it's not one size fits all. Meaning, are you in a dense urban area? Do you live in New York City? Do you live in Dallas? Where do you live? Or do you live in a more rural setting, suburban? So depending on where you are, your considerations will vary. The categories are sort of similar, saying, okay, because they talk about bugging in or bugging out, meaning what do you need at home in the way of supplies for food and water? And there's time horizons on that. Like some people really recommended you need to have like a 72-hour bug out bag, meaning if you have to get out of where you are, something that you grab and you got 72 hours that it provides you with food and water and other such things to get to another place. Some people, depending where you are, though, you might not need to leave or want to leave, but one of the most fascinating interviews that I had was with a former Navy SEAL commander.
Is this in the documentary?
This is in Endgame? Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So in Endgame, I interview a former Navy SEAL commander. His name is Larry Yatch. He, Annapolis grad. Was for over 10 years a Navy SEAL commander. Working in the Mideast, and so many people talk about, for example, having arms, having guns and ammunition. And he said, I run training. It's part of what he did and what he does. Where people think that if they have, some, good array of guns and some ammunition, they're kind of ready. And he said, nothing is further from the truth. He said, number one, going to a range and shooting at paper targets is a very different thing than real life. And he said, so if you're not training to utilize those weapons with your heart rate up, your adrenaline levels up, your cortisol levels up, and you're in sort of a challenged position, he said, people that are heroes at a gun range, shooting targets and being able to place, several rounds within a 2-inch diameter at 30 yards or something. He said, I bring them into a training environment where, we're just kind of putting them under some pressure to try to fire those rounds, and they can't hit anything. So there's a different type of thinking and training that goes into this, and a mindset. But he said also on Navy SEAL missions, he said, when we were doing operations, if we had to fire a weapon, we failed. We try to set up our scenarios and our operations where we never have to get to the point. It's like the fifth thing that you have to think about is now having access to your weapon and being able to fire it. There's a whole bunch of things about hardening a target and how to do that and other such things before you get to a point where you actually have to fire a weapon. So that to me was, because I'm one of these guys, I have weapons, I have ammo. I go to the range locally here. I live in Park City, Utah. And I'm feeling like, it gave me a sense of confidence. And I realized it was a false confidence after I did that interview with this Navy SEAL commander. So there's things to think about there as far as your home and home protection and protecting your family. And man, did he really have this laid out as a Navy SEAL would, in a very methodical, logical, organized way. Your rations, as far as food and water, you really have to give consideration to that. And there are the stuff that you might store that's on hand, and how much of that do you need? There's a lot of conversations around that, but also the consideration of where do you live? If you're in any kind of a population center, you might want to get away from that population center and make sure that you have proper stores in these other places. So there's a lot of conversation in the categories of basic prepping and surviving should things get adverse. And again, it might not be that there's something that our government caused. You might be there's a lot of civil unrest going on right now. Right. But we go back to Texas, and I could tell you that if people start getting without water and then without food for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, roving gangs and that kind of stuff, that's gonna happen. It's not, it might happen. It's gonna happen. And you have to figure out, how are you gonna protect yourself? Do you have a way to get out of there? There are some more extreme considerations about EMPs, potential threat, where, if there's an EMP that goes off, what could happen there? I think that's a little bit lower on the probability scale, but could happen. Right. More considerations for that type of a thing. So what I could say is that after 30 plus conversations around all the implications of this, there was a lot I didn't know, and literally a lot that I'm taking action on now as a consequence of doing all these interviews.
I'd imagine. Yeah. You know what I think is higher probability that would lead you to need like this plan B that we're referring to, is maybe just the lack of police officers in the future. Because, I was trying to think through this with a friend the other day who has been a police officer for, maybe 10, 15 years, something like that. But I told them honestly, I said, in today's environment, you couldn't pay me enough money to be a cop. There's absolutely no way. And I know that, some officers have their problems and whatnot, but if you think the cops are bad now, wait until you see them in 5 or 10 years, because the only people that would apply for that job based on the current environment, and that current environment will most likely get worse, are the people that you don't want to be police officers in the first place. And you got to ask yourself, if you were a police officer right now, how would you pull over just everyone that you normally would, or would you say, you know what, it's not worth it. Look at my risk reward. I've got a pension. I've got a family. I'm not going to do that. So my point is, in the future, maybe a lot less law enforcement. So a lot more people have the ability to break the law and ignore private property rights.
Yeah, I have several police officers that are family members, uncles, cousins, etc. And the conversations are pretty dim around, being a police officer in today's world. And these movements that are anti-police and defunding the police are, in my mind, they're starkly irrational. Doesn't mean that there aren't problems that need to be addressed, but I just feel like the way the problems are being addressed is almost antithetical to solving them. It's
Right,
really the opposite of what we need. So, and one of the interesting things is you were mentioning this that came up. One thing I remembered as I was interviewing one of the preparation experts, he said, if there's civil unrest and things are really starting to get heated, and if it gets to kind of that fever pitch, and you live in an apartment building, and think about this, let's say you're in a high rise,
mm-hmm.
and you got an apartment there, and there's all these other people. And suddenly, food supplies can get cut off. Getting supply chain, to work right when there's all kinds of problems is an issue. Hopefully, you've got at least maybe a week's worth of supplies to bug in. That you don't have to rush out right away. He said, because here's what a lot of people are doing, and I'm noticing it even here, like you people from New York, LA. They're buying up property. They're looking for places to get out of the city should, stuff hit the fan. And even, just with COVID, we came very close to some significant supply chain disruptions, even with the COVID shutdowns. And that, can translate into a lot of civil unrest. But he said, what people who even have bug out properties, a mistake they make is that as soon as the shit hits the fan,
Mm-hmm.
they are, they're like, running right out. He said, you don't want to be a part of that first wave that's in long lines of traffic at a bridge or a tunnel trying to get out of the city, because you're sitting duck there as far as, gangs and what have you coming and trying to, fleece you for whatever supplies you're trying to take out with you.
And everyone's hysterical in addition to
everyone's
that.
hysterical. He said, there's this sort of sweet spot between the initial panic, and you don't want to stay too long, because when things really degenerate, you're not going to be able to leave, because there's going to be more and more, gangs and so on that are going to be trying to attack. So there's this sort of window that you go into, saying, let that first wave of hysteria go, then be the next person out before it gets really, really bad. So it's just like, these are things that as this person I was interviewing talked about this, who was actually a former military also, talked about this. I said, wow, now it completely makes logical sense, but it's not something I would have thought of otherwise. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah. So there's just so many considerations that, I would have thought, hey, here's a checklist of 10 or 15 things, check the boxes and you're okay. And no, there's more to it than that. And it's a really good idea to listen to people who've been thinking about this for a lot of years, because they get it.
And have been in the trenches, have experienced stuff. Yeah,
is creating community with other people that you're going to kind of coordinate with, as compared to just trying to do it on your own. That was another major thing that almost one of the universal principles. Because I just bought recently for myself, it really in large part a consequence of what I learned in this series. I just bought 42 acres of land in Sedona, and it's a 20-minute dirt road, out to get to this land. And I'm setting it up, drilling well. I'll have mechanical, but I'll also have manual pumps to be able to get water out. So I started thinking about all these things, but to a T, everybody says you cannot try to go it alone. You have to have a community of people that you're working with if you want to survive after some sort of a very adverse event, as compared to saying I can get very insular. I've got my guns, I got my food, I got my water, I got my place. There's still got to be a community, and they get into the reasons why and how to create that community, which is really important.
Yeah, one thing I've always thought of is, okay, say that it hits the fan to the point where you're like, you know what, I need to get out to that 42 acres. When you're talking to these experts, do they give you any time horizon as to how long it usually lasts to where you need to be in that space for X amount of time? I mean, is that like normally a month where you just need to get the heck out of Dodge? Or can that be a year? Or, I mean, or is there a norm? Have these guys experienced anything like that in other countries?
It's very scenario dependent.
Yeah.
So an EMP, that could be a longer period of time. A supply chain break that's starting to create some unrest. That it's kind of like think of gas supplies. I was driving in the '70s when I was waiting in long lines, and they're starting to have that in the East Coast again. And I'd say that in those scenarios, that could be more passive, like a month or something. And it really, really depends on where you are. Meaning, again, if you're in a dense urban area, it might be you might be out of there longer than if you live in a suburb that kind of recovers a little bit more quickly. And that's where I'm like thinking along the homesteading line, saying I want to have regenerative things, meaning I'm growing my own food. Not that I have a certain amount of supply and it goes away, but I've got a garden. I've got wild game that come through that property in Arizona. I've got water. So I think there is probably, you want to prep for minimum of a month, but you also want to have a strategy for saying if I have to be here longer, or if things really melt down. I mean, one of the great things, and you spoke about this incidentally. I thought your interview is one of the best interviews of the entire series. So thank you for doing it. Yeah, I really, very few people can paint a picture like you paint and see the big picture, which I think is really important. And one of the things that you and I spoke about, which is chilling, is the wealth gap that's growing, and the more it grows, I think that's a huge threat on the horizon. Meaning, guys like you and me are going to be just fine financially. I think we're positioned right, and we're understanding right, and we're going to be okay financially. But what's not going to be okay is how more and more people are going to be have-nots, and the threat that starts to build. And the government's solution, as you laid it out, is trying to redistribute that wealth to keep the natives so they're not restless. But that's a very ill-fated approach.
Yeah.
So that's a big threat. And saying, boy, in some of these cities where you've got a bunch of people who are impoverished, and they're impoverished based on the policies of what's going on, and they start to see the haves versus have-nots, and they're gonna start encroaching, and I think they're gonna riot. It's only a matter of when in some respects. So now, how long can you get out of the city? And I don't know when you can go back. If you are in the city. So I wish, so people speak to timelines, but pretty much all of them say that it's very scenario dependent and it's hard to predict.
Yeah. As you were saying that, one of the first things that struck me was all of the hedge fund managers that I know that have moved out to, like, the Caribbean, as an example, to the Cayman Islands, to St. Bart's. I don't know if you've ever been to St. Bart's, but it's just a little teeny island of maybe, 5,000 people. It takes you 10 minutes to drive from one side to the other. And the very last place I can promise you will ever see social unrest or civil unrest is in St. Bart's, because every single person there is a millionaire or billionaire for that matter. And but what's interesting is you see all these global macro guys that have made that move personally. And initially you think, well, it's got to be just because of taxes. But when you sit down and talk to them, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, usually it's because, we understand that there's an immense amount of global debt, and the debt levels at the sovereign, or excuse me, the debt at the sovereign level, all-time highs, corporate level, the consumer balance sheet, they're all at all-time highs. And that doesn't end well. And we just don't want to be around a large group of people when that's in the process of unwinding. And then another thing that I thought of is I just listened to an interview with, I believe the gentleman's name is Neil Howe. I apologize if I'm saying his name right or wrong, but he did The Fourth Turning, the book, and he talks about, and he's a demographer. So he's studied all of these trends going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And he said that right now, the divisiveness that we have in the United States, using that as an example, is something we have only seen in the United States at a couple times in our history. The biggest example would be right before the Civil War. The time before that would be the Revolution. And so his point was, I'm not saying that it has to end this way, but what I am saying is in the past, when we've gotten to this point, it's only gone one direction. And that's in some sort of like civil war, if you want to look at it that way. So there's a reason to have a plan B. You see the global macro guys doing it, and you see these guys that really study history talking about where we are and how it's really a powder keg right now. And everything that you're saying just reminds me of that. How did you get into filmmaking in the first place?
That's a really interesting question. So far as if you'd asked me 6 years ago, or if you told me 6 years ago that I'd be doing what I'm doing today, I would have said, you're out of your mind.
Join the club. Join the club.
Yeah, it's I've got I had no prior background in film production, but I'm a serial entrepreneur. So the quick story is I started life as a chiropractor. When I was in practice, I developed diagnostic technologies, neurodiagnostics. I got patents on, and next thing you know, I found myself in business, and I ran that company as its CEO for 23 years. We sold that company in 2011. And then formed a small holding company with my wife, doing very little projects that we were interested in, passion projects, invest in some things. And we did a bunch of startups, on things that we just felt were important and that we felt from a capitalistic standpoint would add value and create profit. Mm-hmm. So about, I guess it's 5 years ago, I had been in documentaries as an interviewee. A gentleman named Jeff Hayes, who's been a documentarian for probably 20 years, a filmmaker, had me in his series a couple of times that were in healthcare related stuff that I was an activist, very much an activist. So I'd show up in some of these documentaries. And what happened was I had a passion project around this particular issue that I called Jeff up and I said, hey, you got footage on this for me? Can I use some of it for this project I want to do? And he said, I'll do better if you want it, because I'll partner with you on it. We can do it together. I said, that'd be great. So it was just, I literally funded it. I was just hoping I'd get my money back. That would be the best outcome I was hoping for at the time. And the thing ended up being explosively successful. So we said, oh, let's do another one. And we did another one. It happened to be on GMOs and Monsanto before the whole house of cards came down, but we knew what was going on there and we wanted to report on that. And that was very successful. Next thing you know, we're in a business. So here we are, probably 14 docuseries later, doing this particular one.
Wow, that's very cool. So tell us about the specifics of the end game as far as how people can watch it. I want to point out that it's a free docuseries that people can watch, but the way the format that you're rolling this out is extremely unique. Can you explain how it works?
Sure. So I think you have a link where people can register for free to see the.
Yeah, I'll put it in the description below. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just go to that link, and there you just sign up by giving us your first name and email, and if you want text notifications, which I recommend because a lot of times the email service providers don't like the truth they get out. As we know, there's a lot of canceling and propaganda and censorship going on an unprecedented level right now. So it's been really interesting for us to navigate those waters because we're saying some pretty unpopular things. But you go there, you register, and then the way it works, it's a 9-episode series. Each episode has 2 to 3 interviews in it. And what we do is a day at a time, we put up episode 1 and it's up for 24 hours and we take it down and we put up episode 2. So over a period of those 9 days, we show the entire docuseries, and it's free of charge for anybody in the world to watch. I like it because if at a point in time people want to own it, they can, and they can just purchase it. It's very, very affordable. It's inexpensive. But what I love is that basically you get to see it for free, and if you said, okay, I'm good, you don't have to buy it or have no compulsion to buy it. But if we did a really good job and there's information there you want to revisit, that's it. Then you can buy the series. And if we didn't do a good job, we don't deserve your money. It's that free market capitalism thing that I love so much. So we'll gamble on ourselves. We think we did an extraordinary job. We put together a great assembly of people, and it's day by day. You watch it for free. You can share it with your friends, get them to watch. A lot of people have watch parties.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
Yeah. So that's really cool. And like I said, we have a lot of really strong people in it. A lot of marquee names you'll know, and there's some people that you never heard of, but you'll know them after this, and you'll be glad that you do. And I felt like it flowed really well as far as the varying topics that we covered.
Mm-hmm.
Very often we go into this and we kind of start, with a certain thought about how this might go. But then once we get in, it takes on a life of its own, as we interview more and more people, and then they
right.
we get the subjects we weren't even aware of that were important before the series. So it always is like a magic carpet ride when I do these, which is why I love it. But I certainly invite your audience. They should come in, check it out. I think they'll feel like it was very much worth their time to see what it is that we put together.
What do you think people will learn the most from watching the docuseries? Do you have any guess after? I'm sure you've seen the final edit.
Yes. So the first thing that they're going to learn the most is that the threat is much more real. And
you say the threat, the threat of social unrest, or the threat of something happening where you would need a plan B?
Yes.
Okay.
Because what's interesting is I looked at these things in separate categories, like, oh, okay, you got to be financially prepared and you should have some food and water. And now I started to realize these things are all intertangled. They're untangled. They're intertwined. And
you're right.
And the threat that something can happen that could be extremely disruptive and could be protracted is much worse than I thought. And I thought that there were some things here to say, hey, you got to hedge a little bit here, but it's really likely we're going to see some upheavals and maybe even a series of upheavals through the next few years. And being prepared is critical. And also, I believe it's an 80-20 rule, meaning if you can take action on 20% of the stuff, you're going to get 80% of the benefit of learning it and taking the action. Prepping can go down a very deep rabbit hole. There's some people that really get consumed by it. I'm not one of those people, but I just found some low-hanging fruit that I can get in there, do some of these things, understand my living circumstance, and how that relates to what I learned to prep properly for myself and my family. And I'm feeling at this point, now that I've done the series and I've started taking these actions, I feel like I can sleep a lot better at night now, and I'm ready. And it's not a huge investment necessarily. I mean, you're buying over 40 acres in Sedona, is a big investment, but I'm talking about some of the low to the ground things that you can do. It's not a huge investment, but I believe it's one that everybody needs to make right now. It is when you listen to people who know and study this stuff, and as you started to point out, sort of these ominous parallels to other times in history, when you start seeing polarization at the level that it is right now, you start seeing debt at the level that it is right now, you start to now see a new administration come in and the stark irrationality of what they're doing, et cetera. As my mentor, Nathaniel Brandon, told me, no one is coming to save you. You've got to take responsibility yourself. And I think that's what this series is all about.
Yeah, well said. What are you doing outside of just buying the acreage personally, just to kind of hedge your bets or make sure that your probabilities of maintaining your personal freedom and liberty are extremely high moving forward?
So there's several things, but certainly food stores where I am, I've increased quite a bit. A lot of water stores. Park City's, I'm on 7 acres here in Park City, only one other house on my whole street. It's, and fortunately in my circumstance, in Utah in general, there's a large Mormon population. The Mormon religion has, preparation is one of their sort of core values. So, they're going to have guns and water and food also that they're well prepped. So I think a lot of my neighbors in essence are I'm in a less threatening neighborhood, but also as far as, financially and a reallocation of where my investments are, I've changed that considerably. Precious metals, I've upped the game there. I'm moving heavier and heavier into crypto every single day. And I'm out of the market completely. I'm not in the stock market. Let me think. I shouldn't say that. I'm a little bit in the stock market now, but I have no faith in it, and I'm very concerned about it. So financially, and I'm starting to invest in more real estate. So financially, I rearranged things. And then, so what I'm looking to do is to be able to bug in here for probably a minimum of 3 months. So I'd say that, if it hit the fan, I'd be good for at least 3 months with, no other supplies coming in for myself and my family. And then the next thing I'm doing is developing the bug out property, which is, like I said, and incidentally, why did I pick, I was going to come where you are in Florida, but I'm realizing I might not be able to get on an airplane. Right. And so where can I drive to? That's a place that I'd enjoy, meaning, it gets cold here in the winter for a long time. I ski, my wife doesn't. So we're looking for a place that we're going to enjoy. It's not just a bug out property. It's a place that we love to go to anyway, right, but it works as a bug out property. So getting that land developed is the other more long-term, bigger plan.
One thing I've talked about on my channel extensively is if you've got a plan B, that's great. But I think you also need to think through, where's the line in the sand that would prompt me to pull the trigger or execute on that plan B? And that ideally would be premeditated, because if it's really getting, kind of bad, let's say, for lack of a better term, you've got a lot of emotion, who knows what's going on. You're not making real smart decisions, most likely. But if you've got a plan set up and that, okay, if this happens, or if this and this happens, I'm gone. And I'm thinking about that in advance. So it's more of a pre-programmed response instead of something that's reactionary. Did the guys or gals talk about that at all?
Very much so. And this is where you start to see how deep this can go. So again, contextual. If you're a person, individual living alone, then yes, you'd want to figure out where your fail safes are, as far as saying, when something happens, I'm going to, this is where it's time for me to bug out. And, are you in a city? Are you in a suburb? Where are you? Those things matter. A little bit more complex, like my situation, where, you've got kids at home, so you're a family. And there are multiple scenarios. One is maybe what you're describing, which is sort of, you're seeing, hey, the market just crashed on a Monday, and then on Tuesday there's some civil unrest, or there's some, and then you start to see some dominoes start to fall, where it's not like an instantaneous thing, but you start to see that, okay, it's starting to get pretty threatening as far as the storm clouds that are forming. And now, we should hop in a car and maybe go to our bug out if we've got a bug out. I know a lot of people here, and that's where I'm saying context. I wish it was a universal answer. It's not. If you have a cabin 45 minutes from here in a place called Camas, like many of my friends do, it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's only 45 minutes to get there, and you don't have to be that pressure to say I better get out right now or else. But the more chilling, I guess, scenarios where something happened really fast, like there was something really big that just happened. Like one of the guys would talk about how if you got kids at school, each of them has like a thing in their backpack that gives them, step one, we're going to meet in this place. If communications are down, we can't get all. And then there's a second scenario, a third scenario. Where and how do you meet up? What kind of tactics do you have to say that? How far away are they from the house? How can they get back into the house? Incidentally, if you're hearing it, I'm looking out here, you're seeing thunder and lightning. We just had a big thunderstorm here, so that's the background noise. If you hear
it sounds like a fire drill. No, I mean not the thunder, but what you're talking
actually,
about.
It's hail. I'm looking at it now. Big hail things are hitting my roof. Okay,
but what I'm referring to is
never a dull moment here in the mountains.
When you were mentioning the kid having the thing in the backpack, that sounded like a fire drill. Remember when you do those? So you'd be prepared if a fire happens, you go
That's
here,
right.
you go here, you go here, you go here. So then you kind of, you do it in advance periodically. So then if it does happen, it's just more routine and not just hysteria.
Yeah, very good, George, because that's exactly what they say. It's like you have to, like, at least quarterly, if not monthly, rehearse the drill and go through. Okay, this happened. What do? You do this. You do this. You do this. Another one that was really interesting that I was talking to my wife about this morning. So I guess I'm going to be making a vehicle purchase or maybe two. Is with EMPs, and an EMP is something that can happen. Uh, if you got a car, and it's a modern car, your car is worthless. The car is toast. So you want to have an old vehicle that doesn't have circuit boards and fuel injection. An old carbureted mechanical engine rather than a more computerized engine. That you keep like a Jeep or something, so that you still have wheels should technology be blown out by an EMP. Something again I hadn't thought of, but
I hadn't
it's
thought
not a
of that
lot of
either.
money
Did
to
they
buy an
give
old
you a
piece.
line in the sand as far as the year of the vehicle? Like you're going to be safe if you get something older than XYZ?
Depends on the manufacturer. But one of the things is look for one that has a carburetor, not a fuel injector, and that's typically where they're going to be mechanical. Which I've had those cars, an old Jeep like that. So that's probably back,
Back in the
certainly in the
80s and the
70s.
oh,
Yeah,
70s. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
70s is where I'd look. I think anything in the 70s is fine. Probably fuel injection became really popularized sometime in the 80s. So early
Right.
80s is probably okay. I think it just depends on the manufacturer.
Yeah, so I've got to start looking at. I'm thinking what cool cars there were in the 70s. There, remember those Scouts, those International Scouts? Those are becoming really popular now, and that's a really cool truck. Maybe you get something like that.
Yeah, and that's why I used to be able to work on my cars back. I graduated high school in 1977, and so I used to be able to. I took auto shop, so I used to really work deep in those engines. I'm like, geez, I can't work on a car today. It'd be kind of
Oh
fun to
no.
go buy an old car back from my high school days and have it around and be able to work on it.
Oh yeah, you used to be able to swim in an engine bay of a truck. You could hide out in there for a couple days. You could eat lunch in the engine bay. All right. Well, very cool. So what else, what other surprises or what were you expecting when you went into this? You were talking about how you saw the evolution of the edit or the docuseries as, okay, I'm going to organize it into these four buckets. And then we're just going to get details and expand on those four buckets. And then probably, I'm guessing you thought we'd just connect them at the end for the viewer.
Correct.
But you said what ended up happening is they all were kind of intertwined right from the beginning. So was that the biggest surprise, or was there something else that really had a profound impact on you, or that surprised you as far as the direction in which the interviews went?
So I think how things were intertwined was certainly something that was an aha. Like, oh, I didn't see how these things all relate to each other. Now I do. The second thing was how much context matters, because a concern I had starting the series was that, geez, how many times can we talk to people about these sort of 3 or 4 topics?
Right.
With money and finance, because we've done shows on that before. It's like, hey, there's always a lot of places to go, but on the rest of it, I felt like, yeah, it's kind of like when to have a certain amount of water, have a certain amount of food, and it's like, oh no, this is almost a lot more complex in its considerations than finance, and how where you are matters a lot. The type of rations you have, because people think of things like saying, oh, because I have down in my cellular, I got bags of beans, bags of rice, these dried foods, and then somebody says, well, you realize you need water to cook those, right?
All right.
Where goes that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So you got to think about that. And then you start to look at these, they call these MREs, which is one type of a ration. But then you can have freezers, but you have backup for the freezers if you lose power. There's a lot of things that make total sense when somebody brings them up. But you and I, in our daily life and our daily activities, like most people who are out there working, making a living, doing the things that we do, we just haven't spent the time. It's not like it's complex in the sense of, we're doing, physics or calculus. It's just complex in the sense that there's a lot of variables to think about, but once you think about them, things make pretty good sense. And that's the whole point, is that every person that we spoke to, like I said, that Navy SEAL commander and many of the other preparation experts, they had things that were kind of their angles and their particular area of expertise that really brought light to things. What happened to be traveling and stuff goes down, and that's that fire drill thing that that to be thinking about, and so there's just so many things to consider that I'm glad that I feel like what we did is we took probably 300 or 400 hours of, if you went out to do this training on your own or go on YouTube and
all right, just consolidated.
We distilled it all down to under 20 hours, and everything you need is in there. So I feel like that's that's kind of the virtue of the series.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did anyone talk about having an international plan B, or just domestic?
It's interesting. The answer is yes. And people talked about, what it might be like to be in places like, Costa Rica or, Cayman. You had mentioned, some areas where people go. If you're out and you can't get back, some of the things that were talked about, for example, we're having second passports. And a lot of that's becoming very popular right now, is getting a second passport where, you might find, for example, if you had a second European passport, now you are a citizen of the European Union and you happen to be overseas and something happens, it's beneficial for you to have such a thing, especially the way that COVID goes. Because what could be the next thing? A new strain of COVID could lock things down, interrupt supply chains, et cetera. So there's just so many variables that are threats. And so on the international scale, if you happen to be overseas, another thing that was talked about was having money. Like say you're somebody who travels to a certain destination,
right?
Routinely, you should have money stashed in these varying places. One of my friends who's a billionaire, as I was talking to him about this, he's like, oh yeah, he has money in like 16 countries that he has access to. Yeah. So it was like, oh, okay. So there's people thinking about this stuff. I didn't think about that before. And I do a good amount of travel, not lately internationally, at least because of COVID, but when things open up and I start to, get over to Asia again and start going through Europe again. One of the things I want to do is make sure I have access to funds. And I got very close to getting my Italian passport for myself and my family, because I do qualify based on my, great grandfather and great grandmother coming over from Italy. And, there's a whole bunch of rules. And so that's another thing that I want to execute on, just to have that as a backup to my American passport.
That's a great idea. I can tell you from personal experience, it was incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to travel with a U.S. passport back in, what was it, April of last year? I mean, I never in a million years did I think that would be the case, where it was actually hard to travel. Like, you might as well have had an Afghanistan passport. I mean, and I'm just saying that half jokingly. You just couldn't go anywhere with a U.S. passport. And it just shows you how quickly things can actually change. And if you want to be prepared, you need to take action now. I think the key here is you can't do this from a standpoint of being reactionary. You've got to be prepared, and then go ahead. Once you've got your plan, then you go ahead, you sleep well at night, and with the confidence of knowing that you've got things set up. So one of my last questions here would be, how would you, or what advice would you give to people that where this was beneficial? And what I'm meaning by that is, once you start going down the rabbit hole, sure, you might be prepared, but now you're freaking out over everything, and you're scared of your own shadow, and holy shit, what happens if a meteorite hits, or this electrical outlets, or we have social unrest. Now you're aware of these things, or the possibility of these things. So now you can't stop thinking about them. And yes, you're prepared, but life is still miserable because of your increased anxiety. You see what I'm saying? So how can you have the best of both worlds, where you can be prepared, but also use that preparation to make you less stressed out, not more stressed out? Do you have any tips for us?
For sure. And I'll just say, number one, you said, I think what's the most important thing of all, you don't want to be caught unprepared. That if there's any message that comes from this series, the one universal language, message for everybody, you don't want to be caught unprepared. And that was the lesson of Texas when their power grid went down and they had the shortages and the issues that they had. People were caught unprepared, and that was devastating for many of them. And unprepared meaning simple things. Their power went out. They had no heat. And it got, in some homes, it was like, in the low 40s, maybe even colder. And they didn't have like blankets or comforter, just simple things to say, can I keep warm at night? Yeah. They were completely unprepared. I could promise you those people are prepped up now for that kind of a thing happening. But I think it's almost the opposite of saying now prepping creates worry. I think it's very much like insurance. It'd be like, if I was in some sort of a high risk position and I didn't have life insurance for my family, that would keep me up at night. But when I buy the insurance, I now don't worry about that. If I don't have some supplies and some planning and all the other things that we're talking about, that should be keeping you up at night. Once you actually have prep, I mean, I could tell it from personal experience, when I started to reallocate, where my money is, and I started to create, like double, triple the amount. Like I get those 5-gallon things of water, delivered to me. I probably not quite, I didn't triple it. So maybe I got 2.5 times as much water than I used to store. Saying, okay, I sleep better at night knowing I got the additional water stores. I've got the food that's there. Being prepped has now comforted me. It didn't make me panic. But the ostrich approach doesn't work. If you're just going to say, I'm just going to pretend everything's going to be okay, I just don't recommend. That's maybe somehow the ignorance is bliss in that particular scenario, but it also can get you killed, and also it can compromise your family.
That's right. So use the message or use this docuseries as a way to empower yourself, and don't use it as a way just to stress out and be more concerned about the future. I guess the key component there is taking action. If you watch the video and actually take action as a result, then you're going to be more confident about the future instead of less confident.
100%. It's 100% accurate.
Yeah. All right. Well, where can people go to watch the docuseries, and when does it start?
Well, it starts. So today's the 17th, right? So I guess it's the 26th. The 25th. So it'll be May 25th is episode 1. Okay. You don't want to miss episode 1. A lot of great people in that. And then and it goes for 9 days, every day subsequent to that. We will have, some little fun things along the way. Like we'll probably do a live webinar one night, where people can ask questions to some of the guests that were in it, et cetera. So we'll surprise some people. We like to delight them along the way as we can. And the way, have them click the link that's below us. I think where they're seeing the video right now. Okay. So click there. Just first name and email. It's real simple. And again, I would recommend putting in your cell phone. We don't spam you with cell phone. We're just literally sending you the episode links, making sure they get delivered. We have been, some with some of our previous series, like Yahoo and some of the other email service providers wouldn't deliver our mail because we're talking about things that they didn't want people to hear about, and that could happen. So that's why putting in your phone makes it a higher probability that you'll get every episode delivered to your inbox every day. Okay. So that's the best way to do it. And I think it's, some things are sort of like interesting. I think, when we put out, people have a special interest in a particular subject. I think this is more vital. It literally is vital. And, we spent months traveling around interviewing a lot of people to get this thing done. And it's all handed to you on a silver platter. So, and it's free. So go get it.
Yeah, you guys got to check it out. Patrick, thanks for your time. That was a really fun conversation. I can't wait to watch the docuseries myself. I'm super excited to see it. So
Me
great
too.
job. Keep up the good work, and we'll
Thank
talk
you
to
so
you
much,
soon.
and I'm excited for people to see you. Like I said, I've watched your stuff, and you're always great. But I think you're at your best in the series. You really delivered on a high level, so I'm excited for people to see your interview as well as all the other ones.
Thank you very much for the kind words.
Thank you.